Have you ever noticed your pet bird becoming snappier during a heat wave? Or watched wild birds defend their territories more fiercely on sweltering summer days? There's a reason for this. Scientists have uncovered something remarkable happening inside animal brains when temperatures rise, and the implications reach far beyond individual bad moods. Rising temperatures trigger a cascade of neurobiological changes that fundamentally alter animal behavior across the planet. Recent research reveals animals become nearly 4 times more aggressive when temperatures exceed their comfort zones. We're not talking about minor irritability here. This is measurable, dramatic behavioral transformation that affects everything from the smallest salamander to the largest primate. Scientists now predict a 50% increase in animal aggression by 2080 if current warming trends continue. This phenomenon affects backyard birds, zoo animals, wildlife populations, and yes, even your beloved parrot. It's reshaping ecosystems, forcing a complete rethinking of animal care protocols, and revealing uncomfortable truths about the world we're creating through climate change. The question isn't whether animals are getting more aggressive in the heat. The question is what this means for the future of life on Earth. To understand why animals become aggressive in heat, we need to look inside their brains. When any animal, bird, mammal, reptile, or amphibian experiences thermal stress, specific neural circuits light up like a highway system preparing for rush hour traffic. The amygdala, hypothalamus, and periaqueductal gray matter create what neuroscientists call the aggression axis. And heat throws gasoline on this neural fire. Here's what actually happens at the cellular level. Heat stress disrupts the delicate balance of neurotransmitters that normally keep aggressive impulses in check. Specifically, central serotonin function collapses while dopaminergic activity spikes dramatically. Think of serotonin as your brain's natural brake system. It helps regulate impulse control and maintain social behavioral norms. When temperatures climb, this brake system fails. Research on aggressive rats exposed to heat shows cortical serotonin decreases that persist for at least 1 hour after aggressive encounters. This creates dangerous windows of vulnerability where animals remain primed for aggression even after temperatures normalize. The dopamine surge, meanwhile, acts like hitting the accelerator. It increases motivation for confrontational behavior and reduces hesitation before attacking. The hormonal picture adds another layer to this story. Heat stress creates what scientists call a high testosterone to cortisol ratio, a hormonal signature that predisposes animals to socially aggressive behavior. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, your body's main stress response system, becomes dysregulated during thermal stress. This leads to glucocorticoid deficiency, which further reduces an animal's ability to cope with stressful situations appropriately. Meanwhile, heat shock proteins activate throughout the body. These molecular chaperones normally help cells survive stress, but their widespread activation indicates the animal is operating under extreme physiological duress. When heat shock proteins flood the system, the body essentially declares a state of emergency, and behavioral regulation becomes a secondary priority. The energy economics are equally important. Thermoregulation is metabolically expensive. When an animal faces heat stress, enormous energy resources get diverted toward cooling mechanisms, panting, seeking shade, reducing activity. This leaves dramatically less metabolic capacity available for maintaining complex social behaviors and controlling aggressive impulses. It's like trying to think clearly while running a marathon. Your brain simply has fewer resources available for executive function. Recent studies using thermal imaging reveal that animals experiencing heat stress show measurable changes in facial temperature patterns that correlate with aggressive behavior. The eyes, ears, and facial regions heat up as blood flow redistributes, creating physiological signatures that predict aggressive outbursts minutes before they occur. Birds face unique challenges when temperatures rise, making them particularly vulnerable to heat-induced behavioral changes. Unlike mammals, birds cannot sweat. They lack sweat glands entirely. Their only cooling mechanisms are behavioral, panting with open beaks, positioning their wings away from their bodies, seeking shade, and bathing when water is available. This limited toolkit means birds have less margin for error when facing thermal stress. Consider the baseline. Normal avian body temperature ranges from 102 to 109 degrees Fahrenheit, already hovering near levels that would be dangerous for mammals. Even modest environmental heating pushes birds toward physiological crisis. When ambient temperatures approach body temperature, evaporative cooling becomes the only option, and it's metabolically exhausting. Parrot keepers witness dramatic seasonal aggression patterns tied directly to temperature increases. Spring and autumn warming periods bring hormonal surges that trigger intense territorial behavior, mate-seeking aggression, and fierce protective instincts. Large parrots like Amazon parrots, macaws, and cockatoos become particularly volatile during these periods. There are countless documented cases of birds that were gentle companions suddenly flying at people and attacking perceived threats to their chosen human mates. One experienced avian veterinarian describes the pattern. "We see it every year like clockwork. When temperatures start climbing in spring, emergency appointments for bird bites triple. Owners come in shocked because their bird of 5 years suddenly drew blood." But when you look at the environmental conditions, it all makes sense. Rising temperatures combined with breeding season hormones create a perfect storm for aggression. Wild bird research reveals equally striking patterns. Mockingbirds become notorious during hot weather, dive-bombing pedestrians who venture too close to their nests. Red-winged blackbirds and scrub jays show intensified territorial defense during heat waves, with some individuals making dozens of aggressive passes at perceived intruders in a single hour. These aren't isolated incidents. They're predictable behavioral responses to thermal stress. Australian heat wave studies provide sobering data on extreme impacts. When temperatures reached 49 degrees Celsius, about 120 degrees Fahrenheit, researchers documented 29% population mortality in some bird communities. Those that survived showed dramatically altered behavior, including increased aggression toward conspecifics, competing for scarce shaded areas and water sources. Urban birds face compounded challenges from heat island effects. Cities run 7 to 13 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than surrounding rural areas due to concrete, asphalt, and reduced vegetation. This means urban bird populations experience chronic thermal stress even on days that rural populations find comfortable. Research shows urban birds maintain higher baseline stress hormone levels and display more aggressive territorial defense compared to their rural counterparts. Species-specific responses vary based on evolutionary history. Surprisingly, temperate species show higher heat tolerance limits, about 45.2 degrees Celsius, compared to tropical species at 43.0 degrees Celsius. This counterintuitive finding suggests that evolutionary exposure to variable temperatures builds greater physiological flexibility. Desert-adapted birds like roadrunners demonstrate superior evaporative cooling capacity, allowing them to maintain more stable behavior across wider temperature ranges. Recent research hints at rapid adaptation in some populations. Urban bird lineages may be developing enhanced heat tolerance through intense selection pressure, representing evolution happening in real time. However, this adaptation comes at a cost. These birds show reduced reproductive success and shorter lifespans, suggesting they're trading long-term fitness for short-term thermal tolerance. Zoo and aviary management has evolved sophisticated cooling protocols in response to heat-related aggression. Professional facilities now implement frozen treat programs, where chunks of ice embedded with favorite foods provide both cooling and behavioral enrichment. Misting systems create evaporative cooling zones without soaking birds completely. Carefully controlled temperature gradients allow birds to thermoregulate behaviorally by moving between warmer and cooler zones. Emergency protocols activate automatically when temperatures exceed 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff increase monitoring frequency, veterinary teams go on standby, and backup cooling systems engage. Professional bird keepers report that temperature management has become as critical as nutrition in preventing aggressive incidents and maintaining flock stability. The heat-aggression link appears remarkably consistent across evolutionary boundaries, suggesting fundamental biological mechanisms that transcend species differences. This isn't about learned behavior or cultural transmission. It's about basic physiology responding to environmental stressors in predictable ways. Laboratory studies on black-bellied salamanders provided some of the most striking quantitative data. Researchers exposed these amphibians to temperatures ranging from 15 to 25 degrees Celsius, a difference that mimics projected climate warming in their natural Appalachian mountain habitats. The results were dramatic. Salamanders showed nearly four-fold increases in aggressive behavior at the higher temperature. They bit each other more frequently, engaged in more territorial disputes and showed reduced tolerance for conspecifics in shared spaces. What makes this finding particularly significant is its ecological relevance. The temperature increase used in the study matches exactly what climate models predict for salamander habitats over the next several decades. This means we're not speculating about future impacts, we're observing them in real time under controlled conditions. Aquatic species follow parallel patterns. Blunt-nosed minnows become significantly more aggressive when experiencing daily temperature fluctuations from 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, a pattern that mirrors stream warming from deforestation and climate change. Fish begin nipping at each other more frequently as thermal stress disrupts normal social behaviors. Researchers observe that subordinate fish become bolder in challenging dominance, suggesting that heat stress disrupts established social hierarchies. Studies on Nile tilapia reveal that temperature affects not just the intensity, but the nature of aggression. During hierarchy formation at elevated temperatures, fish show more violent confrontations with more injuries. After hierarchies stabilize, aggression remains elevated but shifts toward more ritualized displays, suggesting that heat affects both the establishment and maintenance of social structures. Even invertebrates follow these patterns. European alpine ants show enhanced aggression when acclimated to warmer conditions, with warmth-adapted colonies displaying more grappling and mandible-bearing behaviors. The fact that animals as neurologically simple as ants show heat-induced aggression suggests these responses tap into ancient, conserved biological mechanisms. Mammalian responses follow predictable patterns despite their superior thermoregulatory abilities. Primate studies document increased aggression during heat waves, with both captive and wild populations showing measurable behavioral changes. Research on baboon troops in Africa shows that grooming behaviors decrease while aggressive encounters increase during the hottest parts of the day. Rhesus macaques in tourist areas become more likely to threaten or bite humans when temperatures exceed 30 degrees Celsius. Domestic dog studies confirm temperature-behavior correlations in animals we live with daily. Veterinary records show spike patterns in bite incidents that correlate with heat waves. Animal control reports document increased aggressive dog complaints during summer months, even accounting for the fact that more people are outdoors. The consistency across such diverse species, from amphibians to insects to mammals to birds, suggests that simple sociological explanations are insufficient. We're not seeing cultural learning or individual variation here. There are deep biological mechanisms driving these responses, mechanisms that evolved hundreds of millions of years ago and remain conserved across the animal. Laboratory research provides quantitative benchmarks for understanding these patterns. Most species show peak aggressive responses between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius, with behavior following predictable dose-response curves. Below certain temperatures, animals are sluggish and avoid confrontation due to reduced metabolic capacity. Within optimal temperature ranges, normal social behaviors prevail. But once temperatures exceed species-specific thresholds, aggression spikes dramatically. Time course studies reveal that these neurochemical changes persist well beyond the heat exposure itself. Animals show elevated aggression for at least an hour after temperatures normalize, creating extended windows of vulnerability. Some studies suggest behavioral changes can last several hours, meaning a brief heat spike in the morning could affect behavior throughout the afternoon. Zoo safety protocols have evolved to address these cross-species patterns. Since 1990, 42 animals in AZA-accredited facilities died during escapes or attacks, with many incidents occurring during temperature extremes. Professional animal managers now implement enhanced monitoring during heat waves, recognizing that even well-trained animals become unpredictable when thermally stressed. The assumption that captive animals with years of positive human contact remain safe under all conditions has been definitively disproven. Seasonal aggression patterns in wildlife show clear temperature correlations that extend far beyond simple breeding cycles. While spring warming does trigger reproductive behaviors, the temperature-aggression link operates independently of hormonal breeding cycles and affects animals year-round. Spring warming triggers intense territorial establishment across multiple species. As temperatures rise, male birds begin claiming and defending territories with increasing vigor. Research shows that territory defense intensity correlates more strongly with daily maximum temperature than with photoperiod or hormonal cycles alone. A bird defending its territory on a 75-degree day shows measurably different behavior than the same bird on a 60-degree day. More aggressive calls, more frequent boundary patrols, more violent responses to intruders. Summer heat waves amplify competition for critical resources in ways that cascade through entire ecosystems. Water sources become battlegrounds during droughts, with normally tolerant species engaging in fierce competition. Shaded areas that might host multiple animals during moderate weather become exclusively defended territories during heat extremes. Researchers document animals spending more energy on territorial defense during heat waves, even as their overall activity budgets decrease. These patterns are becoming more extreme and unpredictable as climate change disrupts traditional seasonal cues. Animals that evolved to expect certain temperature patterns at certain times of year now face thermal chaos. Unseasonable warmth in late winter can trigger premature aggression, forcing animals to defend territories before adequate food resources are available. This mismatch between behavioral triggers and ecological reality creates additional stress that further amplifies aggressive responses. Field research documents specific behavioral changes during temperature extremes that reveal the complexity of these responses. Territory sizes may actually decrease as energy conservation becomes paramount, forcing animals into closer proximity and increasing conflict frequency. A bird that normally maintains a 2-acre territory might contract to half an acre during extreme heat, simply because defending larger areas becomes metabolically impossible. But this creates higher animal density, which increases encounter rates and aggressive interactions. Nesting birds become hypervigilant during heat waves, with parents more likely to attack perceived threats. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reports that most bird attacks on humans occur during nesting season, but temperature data reveals that attacks cluster during the hottest days within that season. A mockingbird might tolerate a jogger passing 50 feet from its nest on a cool morning, but attack the same jogger at the same distance when temperatures exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Some species shift to nocturnal activity patterns to avoid peak heat, which disrupts traditional territorial boundaries and creates new sources of conflict. Animals that evolved to partition their environments temporally, one species active at dawn, another at midday, another at dusk, suddenly find themselves competing for space during the coolest hours. This temporal compression of activity patterns increases encounter rates between species that rarely interacted in cooler climates. The ecological cascades are profound and far-reaching. Aggressive animals maintain greater social distances, which affects breeding success and population dynamics. Studies on colonial seabirds show that elevated aggression during heat waves disrupts breeding colonies, leading to nest abandonment and reduced chick survival. The effects ripple outward. Fewer successful breeders means reduced population recruitment, which affects predator-prey relationships and entire food webs. Research predicts that increased aggression could lead to less cohesive social groups across many species. Animals that normally live in stable flocks, herds, or troops may fragment into smaller units or become more solitary. This social disintegration makes individuals more vulnerable to predation and reduces overall population resilience. A fragmented population is more susceptible to local extinction from environmental perturbations. Human-wildlife conflicts intensify predictably during hot weather, creating public safety challenges and management dilemmas. Animal control reports show clear temperature-triggered response patterns, with 911 calls for aggressive animal encounters spiking during heat waves. Wildlife management agencies from Florida to Alaska report similar patterns. Each heat wave brings a surge of reports about aggressive bears, territorial geese, and defensive birds. One wildlife biologist describes the pattern. We can practically predict our call volume by looking at the weather forecast. When we see multiple days above 95 degrees coming, we know our phones will light up. It's not because more people are outside. We've controlled for that statistically. Animals genuinely become more aggressive, more defensive, less tolerant of human presence during extreme heat. Comparative research with human behavior reveals striking parallels that suggest universal biological responses to heat stress. Temperature increases correlate with 1.03 times higher violent crime rates at high versus moderate temperatures, with patterns remarkably similar to those observed in animal studies. The same neural mechanisms that drive heat-induced aggression in salamanders may be operating in human brains, suggesting we're all subject to the same fundamental biological constraints. Climate projections paint an alarming picture of accelerating behavioral changes across global ecosystems. These aren't theoretical concerns for the distant future. They're measurable changes happening right now, with well-documented impacts on animal populations worldwide. Modeling studies predict a 50% increase in animal aggression by 2080 based on current warming trajectories. This projection comes from combining physiological data about temperature-aggression relationships with climate models showing expected warming patterns. Some regional predictions reach even higher levels, particularly in areas experiencing rapid warming like the Arctic and tropical mountain regions. The Apennine chamois population in Italy offers a preview of these changes. Long-term monitoring reveals measurable aggression increases that correlate directly with drought and warming patterns. During the hottest, driest years, male chamois show increased aggressive interactions, longer duration fights, and higher injury rates. These behavioral changes translate into reduced population growth rates, as animals expend more energy on conflict and less on reproduction. Range shifts are already documented across approximately 50% of assessed species, with animals moving poleward or to higher elevations in search of suitable thermal conditions. This mass migration disrupts established territorial boundaries and forces interactions between species that evolved in isolation. The behavioral consequences are profound. Animals encounter novel competitors, predators, and prey in unfamiliar thermal environments. The Arctic provides stark examples. Grizzly bears moving north now prey on muskox populations that evolved without large terrestrial predators. Red foxes expanding into Arctic fox territory bring more aggressive competition styles, outcompeting the native species through superior fighting ability. These are not just range expansions. They are behavioral invasions where temperament and aggression patterns evolved in one environment get imposed on ecosystems that never experienced them. Invasive species interactions create novel, aggressive encounters that existing ecosystems cannot handle. When animals from warmer climates move into previously cooler regions, they bring heat-adapted aggression levels that overwhelm native species, adapted to cooler, less confrontational environments. This behavioral mismatch can drive local extinctions even before direct competition for resources becomes critical. Urban environments serve as inadvertent laboratories for future climate conditions, offering glimpses of what global ecosystems might face as temperatures rise. City temperatures already exceed rural areas by 7 to 13 degrees Fahrenheit, creating extreme testing grounds for behavioral adaptation. Urban wildlife generally shows higher aggression levels than rural counterparts, providing a preview of behavioral changes that may become widespread. However, some urban species demonstrate remarkable behavioral flexibility that may predict broader adaptive potential. Urban crows, pigeons, and gulls show modified aggression patterns, heightened toward some stimuli but habituated to others. This selective aggression suggests some animals can adapt behaviorally to chronic thermal stress, though we don't yet know if this flexibility is widespread enough to prevent ecological disruption. The conservation implications are staggering and demand immediate attention. At 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, 18% of land species face high extinction risk. At 4 degrees Celsius, this jumps catastrophically to 50% of all species. Climate change already affects 10,967 species on the IUCN Red List, with behavioral disruptions potentially accelerating declines through reduced breeding success and increased energy expenditure on territorial conflicts. Species with narrow thermal tolerance ranges face particular vulnerability. Animals exposed to temperature changes exceeding 7 degrees Celsius show significantly higher extinction risk, suggesting that behavioral disruption may precede physiological failure as the primary threat to species survival. An animal might tolerate warmer temperatures physiologically, but fail to reproduce because elevated aggression disrupts courtship, pair bonding, or parental care. The extinction pathway through behavioral disruption operates differently than direct thermal mortality. An animal does not have to die from heat. It just has to become so aggressive that breeding systems collapse, social groups fragment, or energy budgets become unsustainable. This indirect pathway to extinction may operate at lower temperature thresholds than previously recognized, meaning we're underestimating climate change impacts on biodiversity. Professional animal care has evolved sophisticated approaches to managing heat-induced aggression, offering models for broader conservation applications. These strategies emerged from hard-won experience in zoos, aviaries, and wildlife rehabilitation centers, where animal welfare depends on preventing thermal stress and its behavioral consequences. Zoo cooling protocols represent the cutting edge of thermal management. Modern facilities implement multi-layered approaches, including frozen treats, misting systems, and carefully designed behavioral enrichment. Frozen watermelons for elephants, ice blocks with embedded fish for polar bears, frozen fruit kebabs for primates. These aren't just treats, they're strategic interventions that provide cooling while redirecting potentially aggressive energy. Misting systems have evolved from simple sprinklers to sophisticated installations that create microclimates within exhibits. These systems activate automatically based on temperature thresholds and can create temperature reductions of 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit in the immediate vicinity. Animals quickly learn to use these cooled zones, showing measurable reductions in stress behaviors and aggressive incidents when misting is available. Emergency response plans at professional facilities activate at specific temperature thresholds with military precision. When temperatures exceed predetermined limits, often 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit depending on species, protocols engage automatically. Staff increase monitoring frequency from hourly to continuous. Veterinary teams go on standby with sedation equipment ready. Backup cooling systems engage, including auxiliary fans, additional shade structures, and emergency water supplies. One zoo director describes their heat action plan. We have 3 alert levels tied to temperature forecasts. Yellow alert at 90 degrees means enhanced monitoring. Orange alert at 95 degrees adds veterinary standby and visitor warnings. Red alert at 100 degrees triggers exhibit modifications and potential closures. These protocols have reduced heat-related incidents by 80% since implementation. Captive bird management exemplifies these refined approaches. Professional aviaries maintain multiple water sources at different temperatures, recognizing that birds have individual thermal preferences. High water content foods like cucumbers, melons, and berries provide both nutrition and hydration during heat stress. Shade cloth installations create graduated thermal environments, allowing birds to thermoregulate behaviorally by moving between warmer and cooler zones. Birds show measurable behavioral improvements when these resources are consistently available. Aggression incidents decrease, normal social behaviors increase, and breeding success improves even during warm periods. This demonstrates that environmental modifications can successfully mitigate temperature-induced behavioral changes if implemented comprehensively. Wildlife management agencies have developed heat action plans that recognize predictable behavioral changes during extreme weather. These plans coordinate enhanced monitoring during extreme weather events, establish rapid response protocols with veterinary services, and implement public education campaigns to reduce dangerous encounters while protecting both human and animal welfare. Park rangers and wildlife officers receive training in recognizing early warning signs of heat-related aggression. Excessive panting, behavioral changes, reduced social interactions, and unusual territorial displays often precede aggressive episodes. When these signs appear, agencies can implement preventive measures, temporarily closing trails near nesting areas, posting warnings about aggressive wildlife, or providing supplemental water sources that reduce competition. Research facilities now implement sophisticated temperature warning systems with mandatory response protocols. These systems monitor not just ambient temperature, but also humidity, radiant heat load, and wind speed to calculate thermal stress indices specific to the species being studied. When indices exceed safe thresholds, research activities pause, regardless of schedule pressures or experimental timelines. Staff training programs emphasize early recognition of heat stress symptoms across different species. What heat stress looks like in a bird differs from manifestations in a mammal or reptile. Training includes species-specific behavioral indicators, physiological signs, and appropriate intervention techniques. This knowledge base has proven critical in preventing aggressive incidents before they escalate. The key insight emerging from decades of management experience is clear and actionable. Prevention through environmental control proves far more effective than reactive interventions after aggression has already escalated. Once an animal becomes aggressive due to thermal stress, interventions become dangerous for both humans and animals. Creating thermal comfort proactively eliminates the behavioral cascade before it begins. This principle has profound implications for conservation planning as global temperatures continue to rise. Protected areas need to incorporate thermal refugia, spaces where animals can escape peak temperatures. Wildlife corridors must consider not just habitat connectivity, but thermal connectivity, allowing animals to move between cooler areas. Conservation strategies that ignore thermal behavioral impacts are likely to fail even if they succeed on other metrics. The scientific evidence reveals an uncomfortable truth that we can no longer ignore. Rising global temperatures are systematically making the animal world more aggressive through well-understood neurobiological and physiological mechanisms. From backyard birds to zoo animals to wildlife populations across every continent, the heat aggression link represents one of the most consistent behavioral responses documented across species. This isn't speculation or theoretical modeling. It's observed reality backed by decades of research across thousands of species. The neural mechanisms are understood, the hormonal pathways are mapped, the behavioral outcomes are quantified. We know this is happening, we know why it's happening, and we know it will intensify as global temperatures continue to rise. The implications extend far beyond individual animal welfare, important as that is. Ecosystem dynamics face fundamental disruption. Conservation success becomes harder to achieve when animals become more aggressive, more territorial, less socially cohesive. Human-wildlife coexistence faces mounting challenges as animals respond to thermal stress with defensive and offensive aggression that endangers both species. The predicted 50% increase in animal aggression by 2080 represents a transformation of natural systems on a scale rarely seen in recorded history. We're talking about behavioral shifts that will reshape how animals interact with each other, how they use their habitats, how they respond to human presence, and ultimately whether they can survive in a rapidly warming world. Yet research also offers hope through understanding. Professional management demonstrates that environmental interventions can successfully mitigate heat-induced behavioral changes. The protocols developed in zoos, aviaries, and wildlife management agencies prove that we can help animals cope with thermal stress if we commit to doing so. These approaches can scale from individual facilities to landscape-level conservation strategies. Species showing behavioral flexibility appear better positioned to adapt to changing conditions. Some populations demonstrate remarkable capacity for behavioral adjustment, suggesting that supporting behavioral diversity may be as important as protecting genetic diversity. Conservation strategies need to identify and protect populations showing adaptive behavioral traits, essentially preserving the raw material for evolutionary responses to climate change. The heat aggression phenomenon ultimately reveals the deep interconnections between climate, neurobiology, and behavior that shape life on Earth. These connections operate at every level: molecular, cellular, organismal, population, ecosystem. Understanding them isn't academic exercise. It's survival necessity for countless species, including potentially our own. As global temperatures continue to rise, this understanding becomes critical not just for animal welfare, but for maintaining the stable ecological relationships upon which all life depends. The stable climate that allowed complex ecosystems to develop over millions of years is disappearing within decades. Animals are responding with predictable behavioral changes that threaten to unravel these ecosystems even faster than direct thermal stress would. The time for action is now, before rising heat permanently alters the behavioral landscape of our planet. Every tenth of a degree of warming we prevent represents thousands of aggressive encounters avoided, countless breeding successes preserved, entire ecosystems maintained in functional states. The science is clear, the mechanisms are understood, and the solutions exist. What remains is the collective will to implement them. We hope this exploration has opened your eyes to the hidden impacts of heat on animal behavior. If you found this information valuable, please like and subscribe to support more science-based content. Share this video with anyone who cares about birds, wildlife, or our changing planet. The more people understand these connections, the better equipped we'll be to address them. Thank you for watching, and remember, in a warming world, knowledge is the first step toward solutions.